Ta-Nehisi, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Have you read that, or have you shared it with an audience before?
In different iterations a couple other times when I was in the course of working on it, yeah. It's much more finished, what you guys got to hear.
You mentioned things that were contemporary, so I was wondering if how
so
close
yes,
you were.
I've been able to make changes. Yeah.
You use an interesting word, and before I ask this question, I just want to, you ask the audience to think about two things, given that we've all seen, or most of us have probably seen this video. I wonder if we should be thinking about something else also. With the videos that we've seen in the death of Walter Scott and the death of Eric Garner and the death of Tamir Rice are potentially an accessory to justice, but they also mean that we see Black life extinguished on a regular basis. And that's something that we've gotten used to. And you know, I said this earlier on social media, that my father's generation and his father's generation were scarred by the memory of seeing Black lives extinguished. And they bore those scars, and those who saw it bore those scars in a special way, as opposed to those who just heard tell of it. We all see it now, and our children see it too, and I wonder if you worry about that.
I worry a great deal about it. I mean, it's always the possibility of, and I just wanted, again, you know, it was one of the reasons why I wrote the piece the way it did. You know, people become like names to you, and then they kind of get dehumanized, and you know, you lose like all of the texture that makes a human being, as opposed to just, you know, some Black dude who's running and then just gets shot. If we forget that these people are human beings, you know, I think we lose something. You know, we almost surrender to the crime in a particular way. I always have like just a weird reaction to these sorts of things. I watch it and I have like this kind of shell that comes over me where I don't quite process it completely. I was way more emotional reading that tonight than I was when I was actually writing it. I actually wasn't that, you know, emotional when I was writing it. And I suspect that maybe other Black people do the same sort of thing, you know, where you put it in some sort of box. And maybe we get used to putting things like that into boxes, you know, because we can't necessarily cope in the moment with them. But it comes out, you know, it kind of seeps out of you. And so, yeah, I do worry about that, you know, and I worry about the normalization of that kind of brutality. It's why I'm, I guess, in part a little suspicious of like how much cameras will ultimately help. You know, I would much rather us think more about when we're deploying force and why.
So cameras are less necessary.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'm not against cameras, but I just feel like it's kind of a Band-Aid, you know.
I want to ask you about what you just read to us this evening. You used a very interesting term. You used the term dreamers. And that's interesting on a number of levels, because dreamers means one thing when you talk about immigration debate in this country. It means something else when you talk about civil rights history.
Yes.
And it is a word that is attached to a man who did quite a lot, but we remember him most especially for having a dream. And the dream is usually associated with the dream of you know, moving towards something better in the civil rights movement. But you use it in a very, very different way here. And I want you to explain how and why and what the artifice is there.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot going on there, whether it works or not.
By dreamers, are you referring to white Americans?
Yes, you're right. You have it. Yes, you are. You're correct. You caught it. And where the phrase I use in the text is the people who believe that they are white. You know, I tried to actually not, you know, it's sort of a literary device, not to say white America, not to say white people, to say the people who believe themselves to be white. And that, you know, you started talking about James Baldwin. That's actually that's what Baldwin, you know, wrote. You know, he had this, you know, great with because they believe they are white, because they believe they are white. And that was deeply, deeply wise. And I'm going to get to your question about dreamers within this. The popular conception of the way racism happens in this country is the idea that you have a group of people who, you know, came to America who are intrinsically and on some deep level different from each other, on a genetic level, in fact, I would argue. And so there's a race of Black people who were brought here from Africa. There's a race of white people who, you know, came here from Europe. There's a race of Asian people, it sounds awkward even coming out of my mouth, who came here. And then they met a race of, American people who were here, and there was conflict because all of these people were of different races. And we
Even
have a
though
challenge.
race itself is a construct.
That's it. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. But that's not, how we, and I would actually push it further, Michele, not even just a construct, but a construct that is a direct result of racism. And so it's not that we have different races who can't get along and, just, sort of look at each other and decide it's natural for you to be my slave or for me to go upside your head or for me to shoot you in the back as you're running away. Racism came first and then race. Race is the way by which someone who's employing racism justifies the pun. It says you are over here, you're in a different box. There is no concept of race in America that one can talk about in history that is divorced from exercising power over other groups of people. There's no way of doing it, and that's embedded in a lot of our dialogue. The idea that it's race and not racism. In fact, we don't really say the word racism. We don't say the problem of racism. We say the problem of race has been with us. We say we need more racial diversity. We say, we need to...
as opposed to racism eradication.
That's right. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. I mean, we just don't, we are hesitant to actually use the word. We say race still haunts us today, not racism,
But you use this term that is also about something that is ephemeral, dreamer.
Yes. And so one of the things that I think is that from that is sort of this notion about how people have appropriated that speech, and I would go so far as to say how people have strung Dr. Martin Luther King into that speech. And it's a kind of speech that, at least as it's rendered, I wouldn't put that on the speech itself, but as it's rendered, that gives people great comfort in being American, and great comfort in their system of governance. And so one of the things that, I wanted to do is really interrogate, in my actual labeling, how we folded that into ourselves, and how, dreaming is cool, but it also connotes sleeping. And that's really what's implicit in that. That folks are, actually asleep. They are not just dreaming. That part of, getting to the dream is actually being asleep. And I found myself, in the course of writing it, challenged in, people say, folks are blind to racism, folks aren't quite seeing it, folks aren't quite understanding it, and I, went back to this idea of just being asleep, and then, dreaming, being in a dream world, almost.
So you're writing to Samara, you directly address him, but you're also directly addressing another audience.
Yes.
You're directly addressing white America.
I like to not think about it that way. Am I?
Yeah.
I'll leave that to you. I'll leave that to you. I mean, I try.
And I said I'm not to tell on any of you.
Right.
But I always like to sit in an audience, wherever if I'm at the conventions, I leave the stage or the place that I run away from the pen that they put the journalist in, and try to get into a space because I want to absorb it with the audience. And I think I absorbed something in this audience, and it felt like there was another message there in telling your son. Maybe it's like you play pool, the rim shot.
No.
Or that there's the intended target, but on the way it's the layup.
Okay. I get that.
But and I wondered if that was intentional in talking to your son. If you were also, as you were writing this, talking to, I won't say white America, but those in America who hold the reins of power.
Okay, all right.
Whoever they happen to be.
Yes. So I am aware that people besides my son will read the book, and I was aware of that when I was writing. But I didn't want to write that way. I didn't want to write, I'm aware that, like you have awareness, it's not just you, it's not just your kid, and it's not even just black people. Hopefully not just black people. I mean, you want the book to be as well read as possible. But I didn't want that to shape my, the way I approached it, artistically. I was aware that would happen, but I tried to put myself in the mode of writing to Samari. And that actually has a disciplining effect because it means that you can't say certain things. You can't, use language that he wouldn't understand, even at 15. And it actually helped, clean out a lot of the prose. I had to write in this really, really clean way. Me and my editor have this thing called the Samari test. This is before I even started writing this. If Samari understands.
What is the Samari test?
If Samari understands it, then it's well written.
Okay.
Because it's clear. Because Samari's a very intelligent.
That's interesting. Because most of us have that. I have the Betty test. That's
do
my
you
mother.
really?
Would Betty understand this?
Right.
Can I make her understand credit default swaps?
No, but I think that's a great task. That's a great task because ultimately, like the job of the writer is to explain something that's very, very complicated in as clear language as possible. And you have to do that without, taking away any of the nuance or any of that. I mean, you have to be as nuanced as you can. And I mean, somebody's getting older now. At the time we did that, he was about 13. And he was a very precocious reader. He read all these people. He read Vonnegut and, E.L. Doctorow. So it was clear that the boy could read. So if he was looking at me and saying, I don't understand, I had failed. I had failed. And so it was very disciplining to write to him. You know what I mean? And say, okay, what did you not get? What did you get?
I want to talk to you not just about this piece, but also about your body of work. You are a man of great curiosities. You have a very active mind. It's one of the things that I've always admired about you. There was a time when Ta-Nehisi was obsessed with the Civil War and why people of color didn't know enough about the Civil War. And so you were visiting Civil War battlefields all over America. You recently learned how to speak French.
I'm learning. I'm still in the midst of it.
And when you worked on your piece on reparations, you just were like Pac-Man.
Right.
You just really dove into it. Is that something? Has that always been part of your character?
Yes, it's the reason why I was a
I
horrible
think of
student.
you as really.
Yes,
because I thought it
exactly
would
why I
make
was
you a fantastic student.
No, it made me a terrible student because, like, the beauty of journalism is, I mean, if you get to a decent enough place, you get to pick your topic, and it rewards you being insane about like one thing. School doesn't really do that,
Okay.
Like, school doesn't actually. In fact, school rewards you, pleasing your teacher. And I guess to some extent in journalism, you have to please your editor. But if your editor, as you know, is a really, really good editor, what they actually want to see is you being insanely curious about something, and then having the ability to translate it, for your readers. But no, it made me a terrible, terrible student because, like, I write about Howard in there, but I flunked out of Howard. I mean, I had to leave Howard. And a large part of why I left Howard was because I started, practicing journalism professionally when I was 20 years old. And I couldn't believe anybody would pay you to go ask questions you were curious about and then write it down.
It's great.
That's a job that people do. It's incredible. Like, you can have like a career and benefits doing this. I was stunned by this. I wasn't even getting paid that much. The idea that anybody would pay me anything was absolutely incredible. Whereas in school, it was more like, okay, here's what I've said that you should be curious about. Now go figure it out. And so that didn't work as well for me as a young person, and it frustrated the hell out of my parents. I mean, it really, really did, because I was like just a voracious reader as a child, and I would come home, I would fail like 5 out of 7 classes, and they say, "What the hell is wrong with you? Like, what is going on with you? Like, how can you come home and do X, Y, and Z and, go to school and, be whatever?" But I was, and I actually mark, like, going into journalism as just a huge transition in my life.
Because it gave you a place
to
really focus all of that.
Yes, and it made me know, like, I wasn't weird.
That
Like,
intense curiosity
yes.
you had.
And there was a place for that. Like, that was okay. There was a civilized, respectable place where you could put that.
Well, one of the things that you've done, respectable things that you've done for us as a country and in body politic, is to force us to remember things we would prefer to forget. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of the through lines in many of your pieces, is I'm going to study this, I'm going to present it to you in a way that will really force you to examine something that may not be in your history books, that may not be in our popular understanding of this. And in your seminal piece, The Case for Reparations, you did just that, in looking at housing policy and the development of housing policy, in asking us to consider whether we should, as a country, look at reparations. Mm-hmm. You, at one point, didn't think that was a good idea.
No, I didn't. I was more optimistic then.
And you changed your mind.
I did. And as a writer, like, I reserve the right to do that. Like, that's one of the cool things.
Was it before you worked on the piece, or was it the result of?
It was before.
It was before.
It was before. Yeah. It was before. And what happened? And it was actually, it was very similar to what I was talking about, today with the police. This happens across the board. Whenever anything happens, some sort of act, and people go back and forth. Was it racist? Was it not? Is it this? Is it that? And we hem and haw over it. And Well, I came to the Atlantic, and one of the cool things about the Atlantic, I really, for the first time in a long time, I had a space to like really, really read and absorb things.
Which is what they ask of their writers.
Yes,
to really,
yeah, they do.
They
They
ask
do.
them
It's
to
pretty
occupy an
incredible.
intellectual space.
They do, and so that, after doing that, the answer really became, I felt that the answer was fairly clear, that if you brought the people to this country, and you spent, conservatively speaking, 350 years of policy designed to engineer failure and to, design that they be a peon class, that there should be nothing particularly surprising about them existing at the, the lowest level of socioeconomic.
It was interesting that you
platform.
chose housing, because at the end of the piece you realize that no matter where you land on the political spectrum, no matter what color your skin happens to be, no matter where you live, this is the house we all live in.
Yeah.
Because of these housing policies.
Right.
If you haven't read the article, in short, you focus on a gentleman named Clyde Ross. And he wants the same thing that almost everyone wants. He wants to raise his children. He worked hard. He came up from Mississippi. He moved to Chicago. He wanted to own a home, to own a piece of the rock, a piece of this place we love called America, in his case, a little bit of land in Chicago. But he didn't actually own his house because he purchased it on something called contract. And you're going to explain that to us, what that exactly means. So he didn't actually have a traditional mortgage.
So in the 30s and 40s, we decided that we wanted to make home ownership accessible to more people in this country. Before then, it wasn't. And part of that was the idea of engineering a broad middle class in this country. When people talk about like social engineering and affirmative action with black, the white middle class in this country is a completely socially engineered act. And home ownership is a deep part of that.
Largely through FHA loans.
Yes, exactly. And, government loans, loans backed by the government, made home ownership possible for black people. At the very same time we had those programs, we were redlining neighborhoods where, as little as one African-American family could live on a block, and the block could be redlined, which is to say ineligible for any government-backed loans.
Or a foreigner.
Or a foreigner, right.
A Negro or a foreigner in a neighborhood would reduce the overall rating.
And so for Mr. Ross, who had come to Chicago, he had no real ability to get a mortgage. And so what happens when you cut people out of the legitimate lending market? Well, they find the illegitimate market. And in that market was contract loans. And the way contract loans worked was that you put down a down payment, usually some egregious number, on a house that somebody had flipped. Maybe they bought it for $7,000 and now they were going to sell it to black people who were effectively a captive market for $15,000. You would have to, put down and make your payments. You would be responsible for the house, but you wouldn't get the actual deed. And in fact, you weren't actually building equity. You didn't get the deed until you had paid the mortgage down, or what was, pitched to you as a mortgage down completely.
And what would happen if you missed a single?
If you missed a single payment, they would throw you out the house. They would keep the down payment, and they would keep all the payments you had made in the meantime. And of course, they engineered it so that you would be thrown out of the house. That was the point, to get you thrown out of the house. And then they would cycle through another African-American family. They would do it over and over and over and over and over again. And in the 50s, I believe 85% of home purchases by African-Americans in Chicago were done this way. While the broad, at the very moment that you're enriching, you're creating a white middle class, you're plundering black people. That article came out, and I got a call from my mother, and she said that is exactly how your grandmother bought her home. And I didn't even know that, going into it. It's incredible.
And my father was living in Chicago at that time, as all of his brothers were, and it's the reason my family landed in Minnesota.
Wow. Did he buy a home in Chicago?
No, he didn't. He saw what was happening, and went to Minnesota and was able to use the GI Bill, bought a house from a fellow veteran, and that's the only reason we were the first black family to move into a white neighborhood, but a veteran to veteran, he did that, and you know what happened in our neighborhood. We were the first black family to move in, and every white family whose property line touched ours moved out, because we moved in a neighborhood that was not designed for us, but my father did that.
Were they vocal about it? Or did they just silently move out? Like, did they throw things? Did they
No, they silently, but our house was on a corner, and the people directly next to us couldn't sell their house, and they would put signs in our neighborhood and signs in our yard saying, these people live here, and they didn't use the words "these people."
Right.
So people knew if they were buying a house, they were buying a house next to ours.
Good God.
But what you wanted people to do is understand housing policy,
right,
and how things don't happen,
Right.
that they're very,
Right.
very intentional.
Right.
And that in the remembering and that understanding of race in America, that we have to look at the policies that led to
Right.
all of this.
And I think it just spreads to a general, thing. Again, just talking about, going back to the police, like we think these things happen independent of us, that they're somehow outside of us, and I reject that. I think as a citizen, you have a responsibility, to have, the deepest possible understanding you can have of your country, because it's being done in your name. This was done, in folks' name. It's not like that, because, your grandparents who, bought that house because they passed away, the debt is not passed on to you. It is passed on to you because the policy was American. And the society outlives the natural lives of individual citizens. If it didn't, we couldn't have any sort of governance in this country at all. It would effectively mean that, like, anything that you paid taxes for any act that happened before you were born, you wouldn't have to pay for. It would destroy governance in and of itself. And so the policies of the government, responsibility does not disappear, because the individual citizens, disappear.
And yet you are one of the more optimistic people I know.
Am I?
You are.
Thank you for saying that.
No, you are. I mean, because
Appreciate that.
well, and people
Everyone tells me how
assume
pessimistic
he's
I am.
angry.
I know, they do.
And you're not.
I love my life.
But you do want people to look back with clear eyes.
I do.
In the sense, I know you just told us that you're not religion, but it seems that you believe that there's some redemption in that. That if we understand that.
Yeah, I do, because I think like what you have to do is you have to come to terms with what's possible within your mortal life. And that your job within the brief period that you have, is to live it as best you can. I don't, and in fact, this is what I say in the book. Do we, at the end of the day, get racism solved in this country? I have no idea. It would not surprise me if we didn't. It would not surprise me if this was with us for the rest of our days. I actually don't think about that as a particularly pessimistic worldview, though, because that's, that may be a fact of the world in and of itself throughout history. Within that, I have then to decide how I am going to live. I have to then, decide what my own moral code within that will be. My responsibility to struggle is not dependent on whether racism will one day be defeated. My responsibility to struggle is dependent, first and foremost, on the people who struggled on my behalf before. That's the first thing. And the second thing is it's dependent on my own individual morality, how I want to live my life. The fact that I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror and say to myself, I was not part of the people who tried to push the earth into the abyss. That's mine. And nothing, can alter that. Nothing about, what happens out in the world can alter that. Even if I, heard that, tomorrow the world was ending, I still, have something within me that says, oh, I'm going to court myself in a certain kind of way. And I'm okay with that. I'm actually fine. I mean, that's what, life is. We're not, immortal. We have to find, our reasons to live and our morality within it.
But you tell your son that his struggle should not be about converting other people, but our survival depends upon, well, maybe not converting, but coexisting with other people.
Right.
Living in peace with other
Right.
people. Figuring out how to share this planet and cherish this planet.
Yeah. So this is like one of the conflicts of the book. I recognize that that's true. It's a very hard thing to tell a young person, and I don't know if you feel this. The amount of happiness that you can draw out of your life, the amount, of success that you can, feel like, that you experience in your life will ultimately be dependent on convincing people who have an interest in keeping a foot on your neck. It's hard for me to tell my son that. Like, it's really, really difficult to say that. Maybe I need to say that. I don't know. Maybe that's like, maybe I'm not, going far enough. But I have to have, because I think, like, and this is what I was talking about, with these folks who, we so admire, deeply, who, just for the right to sit at a lunch counter got bashed over the head. And we see that, and we have this kind of ritual where, we have this, solemn, sort of way of, being very, very admiring. I look at that stuff, man, and I get so pissed off. And I feel so ashamed, for them. It never should have happened. It hurts me, it burns me that people have to give up some element of their humanity in that sort of way. For other people, on their behalf. I don't know that I can quite go there yet. There has to be some part of you that's yours. There has to be something some way of defining yourself as an individual beyond what the dreamers do. You know, it's very, very tough for me to get there. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but what do you tell him then?
I tell him you have a responsibility to yourself. I tell him you have a responsibility to your ancestors. I tell him you have a great, great responsibility to your grandmother and to your grandfather. I tell him you have a responsibility to the planet. You know, I tell him you have a responsibility to humanity. And that responsibility is to act in the spirit of justice, to act in the spirit of fairness, to be broad-seeing, to be a deeply, deeply humane person. You have a responsibility to tell the truth to people. But if folks are not interested in hearing the truth, you can't yell until you're hoarse. You know, you have to recognize that some people have an interest in not hearing that. And there's some people who are going to hear you, and there's some people who are not going to hear you. And you cannot waste your life. You cannot live your life yelling at people who don't want to hear you.
But do you believe that if you order your steps in the right way, that even the people who don't want to hear you, even the people who turn their back on you, are somehow touched by what you do?
I hope so. I hope so, but I can't order my life around it. I hope that would be a beautiful thing. That would be a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's an interesting thing because I write for a majority white audience, obviously, and when I speak, I'm mostly speaking for majority white audiences. I was up in Wisconsin yesterday at Madison, and someone asked me, they said, do you change, how is your talk different when you're talking to majority black audience, majority, do you change how you write? And I said, I will not change anything. I don't change anything. I'm gonna make it as pure as I can, and either people want it or they don't. And I say that to say that I worry about trying to convince people. I worry that will actually influence how I write and how I talk. And I think to the extent that people have respect for how I write, I think it's almost for the fact that I don't actually, just like Miles Davis, how he turns his back to the crowd. I think people actually get into that, I mean, I know I do. As an audience member, I don't want things dumbed down to me. Man, you do your thing, and then, I'll get in where I fit in, that's what I want. I'm talking about as somebody, who's receiving it. If I were, here, and I was out in the audience here, and I was at, a lecture, say, on LGBT rights, I want people talking above my level. I don't want them, dumbing down and using language. Do you understand, little boy? I know you're just a straight male and you can't quite get this. I want them to talk to me, with all of the fire and all of the passion and all of the rage and all of the love and everything they feel. I want their full humanity, on display. I don't want them contorting themselves. And I guess this is an issue for me because I feel that to some extent we do that as black people and we kind of lose ourselves. Whenever I go to, a white university, a predominantly white university, to speak, there's always, someone there who asks me, and they say, well, what the hell am I supposed to do here? What am I'm saying X, Y, and Z, and people don't hear me. And I just, man, that tears me up to hear that. It really tears me up.
But I wonder if they don't hear them or if they're not getting the response. Sometimes for people to hear you, that they don't necessarily have to nod in agreement.
Right, I agree. That's the other.
And that is...
Because what they're really saying is, I'm not convincing them. I mean, they're not agreeing with me. I mean, that's really, what they're saying. And, I mean, you don't have to agree with me. I'm okay with that. I'm actually all right. I hope I'm making, the clearest possible case, I can. But, I've been wrong before. As you said, I wasn't for reparations.
Maybe that's the best lesson that we can give our children, is that we live in a world where we're not always going to agree.
Yeah.
The world would be actually less interesting if we all did agree. But that if we can figure out how to raise young people who can be their authentic selves and figure out how to do what we're doing here tonight, is listening to a point of view, another point of view.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best you can expect, because the flip side of that is I believe what I believe fervently, but I could be wrong. I just might be wrong. I've been wrong a lot. And so, I mean, you gotta be open to that. Maybe I need to be convinced, instead of convincing other people. So.
Well, the one thing we know that we need you to continue doing is to continue writing and to continue to be curious and to continue to be courageous.
Thank you.
And to continue to bring us stories that help us remember.
Thank you.
I could talk to you all night, but the clock says we have to
Okay,
end
all right.
this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michele. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.